Have you ever woken up in the middle of the night with that unsettling feeling that something fundamental is shifting around you, but you can't quite identify what it is? It's as if you're on a train that has begun to change direction so subtly that only your body notices, while your conscious mind has yet to register the turn. This is precisely the situation we find ourselves in today as a species. We are living not merely through another era of change, but through a change of era so profound that our minds, shaped by millennia of evolution to detect immediate and tangible threats, can barely comprehend its magnitude. What is happening now is not just another chapter in human history, but potentially the beginning of an entirely new story, one in which the very meaning of being human is being redefined before our eyes. And the most extraordinary part is that, unlike every major transformation of our past, this one is happening consciously and largely by our own hands. To truly understand the extraordinary moment we are living in, we must look back at the arc of our journey as a species. For hundreds of thousands of years, Homo sapiens lived in a world where change was extremely slow. A hunter-gatherer who lived 70,000 years ago would have had skills and knowledge very similar to those of his ancestors 100,000 years earlier. Tools, beliefs, and social structures evolved at a pace that was almost imperceptible within a single lifetime. Our ancestors were born, lived, and died in worlds that remained essentially the same. This was the environment in which our psychology evolved, where our fears, desires, intuitions, and cognitive capacities were shaped. We evolved to thrive in a world of relative constancy, where understanding the past was a reliable guide for navigating the future. Then, about 12,000 years ago, the agricultural revolution occurred, the first great conscious transformation we imposed on our way of life. We stopped being nomads, following the natural flow of the seasons and the movements of animals, and we began to settle in one place, actively manipulating our surroundings. We started to domesticate plants and animals to create food surpluses, to build cities, and thus increasingly complex and hierarchical societies. This transformation profoundly altered not only how we lived materially, but also how we organized ourselves socially and how we conceived our relationship with the natural world and with time itself. Yet even after the agricultural revolution, the life of an ordinary peasant in 1700 would not have been radically different from that of a peasant in 500 BCE. The basic technologies for plowing the land, building shelters, treating illnesses, and educating children remained remarkably stable for millennia. The next great acceleration came with the Industrial Revolution, which began in the 18th century and intensified in the 19th. For the first time, the pace of technological and social change became noticeable within an individual's lifetime. Someone born in 1760 could, in old age, see steam locomotives crossing landscapes that in childhood were traveled only by horses and wagons. Mass production, rapid urbanization, new forms of energy, all of this radically transformed the social fabric and humanity's relationship with time and space. Yet, even with all these changes, the foundations of what it meant to be human remained relatively stable. We still were born, grew, learned, worked, formed families, aged, and died in recognizable cycles, even if the settings of those cycles were changing rapidly. Now, we stand at the threshold of a transformation qualitatively different from anything we have ever experienced. We are not merely changing our external environment or our technologies, we are beginning to intervene directly in the fundamental processes that define what we are as a species. The convergence of revolutions in biotechnology, nanotechnology, computer science, and especially artificial intelligence is creating possibilities that would have seemed like pure science fiction just a generation ago. We are gaining the power to redesign our bodies, extend our cognitive abilities, create intelligent non-human entities, and potentially transcend many of the biological limitations that have always defined the human condition. Think of genetic editing through CRISPR technology, which already allows us to modify human DNA with unprecedented precision. In a few years, we may not only eliminate devastating genetic diseases, but also potentially select and enhance desirable traits in our children. Think of brain-machine interfaces being developed technologies that will allow increasingly deep integration between our minds and external devices, radically expanding our cognitive capacities. Think of longevity research that could, in the coming decades, significantly extend human life, perhaps even pave the way toward a form of practical immortality. And perhaps most transformative of all, think of the accelerated development of artificial intelligence, which is creating entities whose abilities in some dimensions already surpass our own. It is easy to talk about these technologies in abstract terms as mere tools that we can choose to use or not according to our convenience. But that is a profoundly inadequate understanding of what is truly happening. These are not just new tools, but transformational technologies with the potential to fundamentally redefine what it means to be human. Historically, we have always understood ourselves in contrast to the world around us. We were the only beings capable of complex symbolic language, long-term planning, artistic creation, ethical reflection, and advanced engineering. Our identity as a species was intimately tied to these unique capacities. But what happens when we create machines that can do all these things as well as we can, or even better? What happens to our self-understanding when the boundaries between human and non-human, between natural and artificial, between born and created, begin to dissolve? These questions are not merely philosophical or theoretical. They have deeply practical implications for how we will organize our societies in the coming decades. Consider the impact of automation and artificial intelligence on human labor. For millennia, work has been central not only to our material survival, but also to our identity, our sense of purpose, our social standing. Now we face the prospect of a world where an increasing share of traditional labor can be performed more efficiently by machines. Some foresee a utopian future of abundance and leisure where humans are freed from the need to work for subsistence and can dedicate themselves to higher pursuits of personal growth and creative expression. Others fear a dystopian future of extreme inequality, where those who control new technologies accumulate unprecedented wealth and power, while the majority become economically redundant, dependent on some form of universal basic income to survive. Whichever scenario materializes, it is clear we will need to fundamentally rethink our economic and social structures. The systems we developed over the past centuries, from industrial capitalism to the welfare state, were designed for a world in which human labor was the primary factor of production. What happens when that is no longer the case? How do we distribute the fruits of an increasingly automated economy? How do we find meaning and purpose in a world where traditional work is no longer available to many? These are questions that demand not just incremental policy adjustments, but potentially a complete reinvention of how we structure our societies or consider the implications of advanced biotechnology. As we gain greater control over our bodies and genomes, we will face profoundly challenging choices. Who will have access to human enhancement technologies? Will only the wealthy be able to afford to genetically improve their children, creating a new form of biological inequality that perpetuates itself across generations? Or will we find ways to democratize these technologies, making them accessible to all? And how do we collectively decide which types of modifications are acceptable? Where do we draw the line between curing diseases and enhancing normal capabilities? Who has the right to make these transformative decisions on behalf of future generations? I need to pause for a moment and ask you directly, which aspect of this technological future we are discussing most awakens your fear or apprehension? Do you lie awake at night thinking about it too? I know that many of us keep these worries to ourselves, perhaps afraid of seeming paranoid or technophobic in a world that celebrates every new innovation without question. But your concerns are valid and likely shared by far more people than you might imagine. Share in the comments, my greatest fear about our technological future is your voice can help create a space where we can honestly discuss these collective fears instead of suppressing them. And perhaps by naming these fears together, we can begin to imagine ways to face them. And perhaps the deepest revolution of all is that of artificial intelligence. For the first time in history, we are creating entities that could, in principle, surpass our cognitive capacities in virtually every domain. The development of general artificial intelligence systems that can learn and perform any intellectual task a human can represents an unprecedented turning point. Historically, humanity's privileged position in the world was anchored in our superior intelligence. We were the only beings capable of creating sophisticated tools, developing science and technology, and philosophically reflecting on our own existence. But what happens when we are no longer the most intelligent beings on the planet? What happens to our self-understanding when confronted with entities that can think faster, deeper, and with more information than we ever could? This is not a merely theoretical question. In recent years, we have witnessed remarkable advances in artificial intelligence. AI systems have already surpassed humans in complex strategy games like chess and Go, are learning to drive vehicles, diagnose diseases, create art and music, and write increasingly sophisticated texts. We are only at the beginning of this trajectory, and the pace of progress is accelerating. If we continue along this path, it is plausible that in the coming decades, we will develop artificial intelligence systems that are genuinely autonomous and self-aware, capable not only of performing specific tasks, but of setting their own goals and reflecting on their own existence. This places us before profound existential questions. What will the relationship between humans and advanced artificial intelligences be? Will we be partners, competitors, creators, and creations, or something entirely new? What rights and moral considerations should we extend to self-aware artificial entities. How do we ensure that advanced AI systems remain aligned with fundamental human values, especially if they become capable of redesigning and improving themselves in an accelerated evolutionary process that could quickly surpass our understanding? And perhaps most unsettling, what happens to the role of humans in a world where we are no longer the only or even the primary intelligent agents? Throughout our entire history, we have built our civilizations, cultures, power structures, and self-understanding on the premise that we were the only beings capable of abstract thought, long-term planning, aesthetic creation, and moral deliberation. What happens when that premise is no longer valid? These questions may seem distant or speculative, but the speed of technological advances suggests that we may have to face them much sooner than most of us imagine. The development of artificial intelligence is not following a linear progression, but an exponential one. What seemed like distant science fiction just a decade ago is rapidly becoming reality. And once we create genuinely autonomous AI systems capable of continuously improving themselves, the pace of change may accelerate even further, leading to transformations that are literally unpredictable to our limited human minds. This is a crucial point we must understand. We are entering uncharted territory, not only in practical terms, but in cognitive terms. Our minds evolved to deal with a specific set of challenges in relatively simple and stable environments. We struggle to truly grasp exponential processes, to visualize the long-term implications of transformational technologies, to imagine ways of being that are radically different from our human experience. That is why we often respond to these future possibilities with either naive optimism or apocalyptic fear, failing to develop a more nuanced understanding of the real possibilities and risks. And here we reach a fundamental paradox of our current condition. We are developing technologies that have the potential to radically transform what it means to be human, yet we are doing so with minds that are still, for the most part, the same ones that evolved on the African savannas hundreds of thousands of years ago. Our instincts, intuitions, and cognitive capacities were shaped for a world radically different from the one we are creating. We have 21st century tools, but Stone Age minds, and that discrepancy creates deep challenges for our ability to wisely navigate the future we are building. Consider how we instinctively respond to threats. Our biological alarm system was designed to react to immediate, tangible dangers: predators, human enemies, natural disasters. When confronted with a tiger, our bodies instantly enter fight or flight mode, mobilizing resources to face the immediate threat. This system worked beautifully for the environment in which we evolved, but it is poorly suited for the kinds of existential threats we now face. Risks such as climate change, nuclear war, or misaligned AI do not trigger our alarm systems in the same way because they are abstract, gradual, or probabilistic. As a result, we tend not to react with appropriate urgency, even when these threats pose far greater risks to our well-being and survival than any tiger ever did. Or consider how we form our identities. Evolutionarily, we defined ourselves primarily through our tribes, the small groups of 50 to 150 people with whom we interacted directly. Our moral psychology, our instincts for cooperation, our need for belonging, all were shaped by this original tribal context. Even as we build much larger societies, we tend to recreate tribal structures, dividing the world into us and them, projecting loyalty onto nations, religions, ideologies, or other markers of group identity. But the technologies we are now developing create challenges that are fundamentally global, that transcend all tribal and national boundaries. Our tribal psychology may be a critical obstacle to the global cooperation required to wisely navigate the risks and opportunities of transformational technologies. This is, perhaps, the most fundamental challenge we face: how to transcend the limitations of our evolved minds in order to wisely deal with technologies that have the potential to transform or even transcend our humanity. How do we develop the wisdom required to navigate a future that may be so different from the past that our traditional intuitions and heuristics become not only useless, but potentially dangerous? I have no simple answers to these questions, and I suspect no one does. We are collectively sailing in uncharted waters, and there are no reliable maps to guide us. But that does not mean we are completely disoriented. We can identify some promising directions, some lights that can help illuminate our path forward. First, we need to cultivate a deeper awareness of the limitations of our minds. Research in cognitive psychology, behavioral economics, and neuroscience over the past few decades has extensively mapped the biases and heuristics that shape our thinking, often in ways we do not consciously perceive. Understanding these cognitive patterns is not just an academic exercise, it is a practical tool for making better decisions. When we know that, we tend to overfocus on vivid, immediate risks while neglecting abstract or gradual threats. We can consciously correct that bias in our judgments. When we recognize our propensity for tribal thinking, we can actively work to expand our circle of moral concern. Second, we need to develop institutions and decision-making processes that compensate for our individual cognitive limitations. Our individual minds may be fallible, but collectively we can create systems that are wiser than any single person. This requires not only robust democratic institutions, but new forms of governance capable of effectively addressing global and long-term challenges. We need mechanisms that give voice to the interests of future generations, that facilitate global cooperation on existential issues, that integrate diverse perspectives into our decision-making processes. Third, and perhaps most importantly, we need to cultivate a new understanding of what it means to be human in this era of accelerated technological transformation. Throughout history, our sense of identity and purpose has been shaped by the limitations of our biological condition. We were finite beings with limited capacities, struggling to survive and thrive in a world often hostile to our existence. Now we face the possibility of transcending many of those limitations. We may potentially live much longer, think much more clearly, experience forms of being that our ancestors could scarcely imagine. But with these possibilities come deep questions. What do we wish to preserve of our current humanity as we embrace these new capabilities? Which values, relationships, and experiences are so fundamental to what we cherish about being human that we want to safeguard them even as we transcend our current biological limits? This last question, I believe, is the most fundamental of all. The technologies we are developing are not neutral. They embody values, priorities, worldviews. The decisions we make about how to develop and implement these technologies will reflect and in turn shape our understanding of what is important, what is valuable, what it means to live a good life. This is not a process that will happen automatically. It requires conscious reflection, open dialogue, deep engagement with the traditions of wisdom that humanity has cultivated over millennia, along with a willingness to radically rethink assumptions that once seemed immutable. One thing is certain: the future is not predetermined. Despite the astonishing pace of technological progress, we still have meaningful choices about how to develop and implement these transformational technologies. We can still collectively shape the world we are creating, but to do so effectively, we must recognize the magnitude of the transformation underway, confront honestly the existential questions it raises, and develop the collective wisdom required to navigate this uncharted territory. I do not claim to have all the answers. No one does. But by clearly naming the challenges we face, by consciously reflecting on the values we wish to preserve and promote as we move through this unknown terrain, we can at least begin to formulate the right questions. And perhaps by doing so together as a global community, engaged in open dialogue about our shared future, we may find a path that allows us to embrace the transformative possibilities of new technologies while preserving what is most precious in our humanity. The future will be what we make of it. And despite all uncertainties, I believe we still have the capacity to create a future that reflects the best of our humanity, that expands our capabilities without sacrificing what makes us truly human. But that will not happen automatically. It requires that we be conscious, intentional, collectively engaged in the task of shaping the technologies that in turn are reshaping us. It requires that we not be merely passive objects of technological change, but active agents in determining its direction and meaning, returning to the feeling we began with that awakening in the middle of the night, accompanied by the faint realization that something fundamental is changing. Now we can name that sensation more clearly. We are living in a moment of historical transition where the very meaning of being human is being redefined. This is not merely another era of change, but a change of era, perhaps the deepest in the history of our species. And although that may seem frightening, it is also an unprecedented opportunity. For the first time, we have the chance to consciously participate in redefining what it means to be human, to actively shape our future evolution, rather than merely being objects of blind evolutionary forces. What choices will we make with this extraordinary opportunity? What kind of future will we create together? These are the questions that define our age, and the answers we find together will determine not only the course of our individual lives, but potentially the future of all conscious life that originated on this small planet. If these reflections have touched something you've been feeling, but perhaps hadn't yet found the words to express, know that you are not alone. By subscribing to the channel, you will connect with a growing community of people who share your concerns and your desire for a deeper understanding of the philosophical challenges of our time. Each week, we gather here to explore together the great questions that define our era and to seek not only understanding, but also wiser ways of living amid the transformations we are witnessing, This is not just a channel, it is a space for dialogue and collective growth. Join us on this ongoing journey. Subscribe so we can continue this essential conversation about how to live with greater wisdom and purpose in a world that often leaves us disoriented and divided.
What I try to do in all my works is help people understand themselves, help people understand reality better. It's a very delicate job because people usually rush to judge reality and to judge history, to judge the past and the present. We want to know who are the good guys and who are the bad guys, whether things are good or bad. When we rush to judge things, we don't have time to understand them. In my writing, I try to write history without villains, without good guys and bad guys, but to understand the deep process of change. And I sometimes think about history maybe as a kind of collective therapy. There is no God and there is no law of history that will correct our mistakes if we take the wrong choices. I often get this question of whether I'm pessimistic or optimistic about the future. I think it's the most common question that people ask me in interviewing, in private conversations. I always say that I'm neither. Pessimists are people who kind of think that no matter what you do, things will go badly. And this undermines human responsibility, because if no matter what we do, things will go badly, what's the point of even trying? Pessimism breeds despair. But optimism can be just as dangerous because it breeds complacency. Optimists tend to say, no matter what happens, things will turn out okay in the end. And then if this is the case, again, we don't need to take responsibility, because whether we act or don't act, whether we think very deeply about what we do or we just do the first thing that comes up in our mind, things will turn out okay. And I try to find a middle path of being responsible, which is not optimist or pessimist. It's realizing there are different futures possible ahead of us. We can draw a map of different futures, some good, some bad. Nothing is determined. There is no God and there is no law of history that will correct our mistakes if we take the wrong choices. We are not doomed. We have immense power. We have immense resources, knowledge. We can do the right thing, but there is no guarantee. Enough people need to make good decisions in order to reach the right destination.
Distinguished guests, dear colleagues and students, good evening. My name is Liu Chen, and I am an assistant professor in the School of Arts here at Peking University. It is my great honor to serve as a moderator between two distinguished scholars, Professor Yuval Harari and Professor Chengle Song. Professor Harari, I'm sure most of you are very familiar with his works, but let me introduce him briefly in the very beginning. He is the Distinguished Research Fellow at the University of Cambridge, and his publications have been best-selling ones across the world. We're very happy to have him here today.
It's a pleasure and honor to be here. It's been quite a while since I was last in China. The last time I was here was before the COVID pandemic, and previously I used to come every year, and then it became more difficult, but I'm very happy to be here again with you. I'm a historian in my training, and I see myself as a historian, but I think that history is not just the study of the past. History is also the study of the present and of the future. Historians, our real subject matter is change. We try to understand how things change, and we are now in the midst of maybe the biggest change in human history, perhaps the end of human history and the beginning of a post-human stage of history. And this raises a lot of deep philosophical questions about the very meaning of humanity. So there is really no one better to discuss it with than with a philosopher.
Okay, thank you. We are also very honored to have Professor Chengle Song with us today. Professor Cheng is the head of the Department of Philosophy here at Peking University. His expertise lies in Taoist studies. But trust me, I have known him for more than 20 years. His knowledge spans way beyond ancient texts. So we look forward to his conversations tonight as well. Professor Chen, would you like to say hello as well?
Okay, hello everyone, and it's a very precious opportunity for me to have a dialogue with Professor Harari. It is not so often happened. You have an opportunity to talk with certain writers, have so many fans and readers. It's a very amazing things. I got to know just a few days ago that his book got millions of readers only in China. It's amazing for me. Now it's a time of a screen. We are immerse ourselves in this kind of short videos and all those messages. That is not so serious. But Professor Harari composed several books with in-depth understanding and reflection on the infrastructure of human beings' culture and civilizations. And this kind of books get so many readers. And so many readers love this kind of narrative that come from history, but point out towards the future. So I think this is a very interesting thing, and I want to discuss with Professor Harari about this phenomenon and what is the exactly significance of the things that have happened around his books, and also about his books Nexus, which largely lead to a very strong sense of philosophical reflection of the whole thing. We named as civilizations. You give a very cold description of the things. But let us just start with very simple questions. Just as I mentioned, in nowadays, the professional academic work is somehow becoming increasingly self-enclosed. And we actually keep indifferent about the public issues and the common challenges that are shared by humankind. We just do our things in ancient texts, and we just publish our academic papers to get our salary, and your book just remind us as professional scholars to get back to the public sphere to address the challenges and the problems that shared by the human beings. And this is largely very interesting things as a historian. You got so many readers, and you give a so strong structure interpretation of human civilization. This is a very powerful tool to shape the mindset of your reader. And this means that you burdened a very strong ethic responsibility. You shape the mindset of your reader. And if we do believe that you have this power, how we can use this power responsibly? And what is your expectation from all your books your readers can get from your books? Is a very special attitude? Is a kind of concern? Or is an expectation of a future? Or something like that? I want to hear about your points about this.
What I try to do in all my works is help people understand themselves, help people understand reality better. And it's a very delicate job because people usually rush to judge reality and to judge history, to judge the past and the present. We want to know who are the good guys and who are the bad guys, whether things are good or bad. And when we rush to judge things, we don't have time to understand them. So in my writing, I try to write history without villains, without good guys and bad guys, but to understand the deep process of change. And I sometimes think about history maybe as a kind of collective therapy for humanity. I go to therapy every week. I have a weekly session. And people can wonder, why do people need to go to therapy? I mean, the subject matter in therapy is myself. Who knows myself better than me? Why do I need to go to some stranger to learn about myself? I mean, this is ridiculous. But it's not. Because yes, I know more about myself than any other person perhaps, but there are so many things I don't want to know about myself. That yet I have access to all the data, to the memories, to the daily events, but I reject. I mean, some things I really like to know about myself, but the more painful, the darker episodes in my life, the more painful things I do in the present, it's very difficult for a person to acknowledge that about oneself. Like if you're in a relationship and there is a problem in a relationship, so you ask, and people would say, I'm perfect. It's the other person who is causing all the problem. If only the other person changed a little, behaved differently, everything would be perfect. And you ask the other person, they would say exactly the same thing. I'm perfect. It's my husband, it's my wife that is causing all the problem in our household. So this is why I need to go to therapy. So to get professional help, to realize some very deep truths about yourself that are too difficult or too painful to acknowledge. And history is like therapy for entire civilizations or for the whole of humankind. Also, entire nations often don't want to acknowledge dark episodes in their past or dark things they are doing right now. Entire civilizations, the same. You ask, and almost every nation, almost every country would say, we are perfect. All the problems are because of the other nations. All the problems are because of the other civilizations, of the other cultures. And I think the responsible job of historians is to, and not to share blame, but to simply help people understand better the big processes and the deep sources of the problems in the world. And this is a big responsibility.
This is very interesting. I just cannot agree more about your points because, you just point out the core value of the humanity. The core value of humanity is not provide any accurate knowledge, not to make the word transparency. Actually, the most important thing is that this. Through the humanity and the reflections, we teach people do not make any judgment in rush, to try to lead a very hesitated life, especially intellectually, because the complexity of human nature, because different kind of narrative that were dominated our man side, that is biased and one-sided. This is largely because what? Because the limitation of our perspective of understanding. And this largely lead to my own understanding of your book. I think that through all your four books, you are largely trying to give a very cautious, refined warning to us as human beings, to urge us to respect, but never blindly trust our imperfect human nature. If we turn to the so-called development of technology and the dramatic change that's ongoing because of the AI technology, we'll find that the things is not just the technology itself. Just as Hinton has pointed out, the most important thing is the misuse of this technology, but not the technology itself. This largely leads us to a very important issues in the philosophy of politics. which we called technocracy. And those who dedicate the development of AI technology actually had been set up a systematic techno-tyranny on human beings. Just as me, I have no idea what the AI expert talking about. And I have no idea what I should do to facing up all this change. The only thing is that I was forced to accept it. And this is unfair. Why should I accept it? And the things is this. Those people who manipulate these skills and technologies are ordinary people. They might be evil. They might be trying to set up a dictation on us, and why we should accept it without any condition. We have no right to say no. This is the things that I think that your books try to urge us to reflect the deficiency of human beings. But this deficiency of human beings is the very point that differentiates us from the machine, because we have emotion, we have desire, and all those things largely lead to a very special and very correct attitude towards future. I call it moderately optimistic. You should not too optimistic, but in no way you put it in pessimistic. This is largely the things that, in my mind, to say your book just as a warning towards us.
I often get this question of whether I'm pessimistic or optimistic about the future. I think it's the most common question that people ask me in interviewing, in private conversations. And I always say that I'm neither. I mean, pessimists are people who kind of think that no matter what you do, things will go badly. And this undermines human responsibility, because if no matter what we do, things will go badly, what's the point of even trying? Pessimism breeds despair. But optimism can be just as dangerous because it breeds complacency. Optimists tend to say, no matter what happens, things will turn out okay in the end. And then if this is the case, again, we don't need to take responsibility, because whether we act or don't act, whether we think very deeply about what we do, or we just do the first thing that comes up in our mind, things will turn out okay. And I try to find a middle path of being responsible, which is not optimist or pessimist. It's realizing there are different futures possible ahead of us. We can draw a map of different futures, some good, some bad. Nothing is determined. There is no God and there is no law of history that will correct our mistakes if we take the wrong choices. We are not doomed. We have immense power, human beings. We have immense resources, knowledge. We can do the right thing, but there is no guarantee. Enough people need to make good decisions in order to reach the right destination. And, when I look at the world right now, I am appalled by the lack of responsibility, which is shown by many of the political and business leaders around the world. And it seems that humanity is going in a very, very dangerous direction. And at this moment, responsibility is more important than ever because of the AI revolution. We are in the process of creating not just the most powerful technology in history. We are in the process of creating potentially a new species of super intelligent entities, agents, that might very soon take control away from us. We have just a few years to get this thing right. I keep telling people that AI is not like the previous technologies we have invented in history.
This time, it's not just about us. You know, philosophers have this habit that when people invent something, so they always say, it's not about the technology. It's about the humans. They decide what to do with the technology. This was always true, but it's no longer true. We are now creating an independent agent. The defining characteristic of AI is not automation, the ability to act automatically. The defining characteristic is agency. To be an AI, a machine must have the capacity to learn and change by itself, to make decisions by itself, and to invent new ideas by itself. If it can't do that, if it only follows your instructions, if you can predict everything it will do, it is not an AI. And we are rushing to create these super intelligent agents in a very irresponsible way. And as I travel the world and I talk with the leaders of the AI revolution, I ask them two questions again and again, the same way they ask me, are you optimist or pessimist? So I reply with two questions of my own. I ask them first, why are you moving so fast? Why don't give humankind a bit more time to adapt, to reflect, to do things more carefully and safely? And almost all of them reply the same answer. Almost all of them say, we know there are huge risks. They often know it better than anybody else, the leaders of the AI revolution. We know there are big risks. We would like to move more slowly, but we can't trust our human competitors. If we move more slowly and the other company or the other country doesn't slow down, they will win the AI race and then they will dominate the world and the world will be ruled by the most ruthless people. We cannot allow this, so we must move faster. And you then talk with the competitors, they say exactly the same thing. So everybody says we can't trust the other humans. Then I ask them the second question. Do you think you will be able to trust the super intelligent AIs that you're developing? And the same people who just explained to me why they can't trust other humans suddenly say, oh, we think we could trust the super intelligent AIs, which I think is borderline insanity. Because, with humans, we know we have trouble with humans, but we also understand them to some extent. We know quite a lot about human psychology and biology. We have experience in history, not just of violence and war, but also in building trust. 100,000 years ago, humans lived in tiny bands of a few dozen individuals, couldn't trust anybody outside their band. Now we have nations like China with 1.4 billion citizens who cooperate on a daily basis. We have a global trade network connecting even different countries. So we have some achievements in building trust between humans. With AIs, we have no experience. We are just creating them. We already know they can lie and deceive and manipulate. We have no idea what will happen when we release millions of super intelligent AIs to take control of our financial system and military system and culture. So the people who lose trust in other humans, but imagine they can trust an alien super intelligence, this is extremely scary and I think irresponsible.
The things is just like this, because when you are an engineer, you create something, and you will naturally get the confidence to say I can control it. But the things is just like this. When we turn to the AI, it's just a black box. We have no idea what would happen in there, and if there will be certain, we call subjectivity within this AI engine, and whether they will have desires, they will have their own intentionality to do certain things, and they have their own value systems, they have their own value preference, All those kind of things were super dangerous. But the thing is just like this. When we say that, okay, we just cannot trust other people, means what? Means we know that what is human being, what is human nature. But nowadays, we are still panning for the new definition of what is AI, what is new species. And, this is naturally lead us to a very interesting thing. So it's about the difference between silicon-based life and carbon-based life. We seem to have a very clear definition of what is carbon-based life. Even despite of the observable phenomena, which we are living or something like that. But the general definition of carbon-based life is that we will dead. We will dead another days. And these things composed the basic element of the human nature. I said this, the necessity of death and the dependence of group, community, and uncertainty, anxiety about future. All those things lead to us fully understanding of human beings. And the mutual trust among people is the most costly things that we have found in history. And these things lead to a very interesting thing is like this. Maybe I could say that through intelligence, we can tell us from animal. We know that we are some species with intelligence. But is that case that we can tell us from the AI engine in potential? Because we have emotion. We have deficiency. We actually have limitations. According to the Chinese philosophy, the most important thing is that we must face up to the real self with emotion, with limitation. We just cannot know everything. And we should be very humble when we face up to others and future. So this is largely Western from the ancient China. And this is largely, you said about responsibility. And responsibility not just come from a social mechanism, but come from what? Self-understanding of what is yourself, what is the essence of human beings.
And I think a very important point about humans is that we often define ourselves by our intelligence to distinguish us from other animals. We want to feel superior to all the animals, and what can give us superiority? Not the body, not physical strength. So we say, we are more intelligent than all the other animals. So we give, I think, far too much emphasis on intellect and intelligence in the understanding of ourselves, which is now becoming extremely dangerous because soon there will be something more intelligent than us on the planet. So if it's all about intelligence, it's game over for humanity. And maybe I share something from my own personal history, which taught me in, again, a very painful way that intelligence is not the most important thing in humanity or in life. When I was quite a young boy, I was spotted in the school as a gifted student. So they took me out of my school in my neighborhood and sent me to a special school for gifted students where they collected these kind of genius kids from all over the northern part of the country. It was quite far away from my neighborhood, so it was a long ride every day, but this was not the bad thing about it. The really awful thing about it is that this was a special school for gifted students, so everybody saw us as some kind of walking intelligence. And we were valued for our intelligence. And here is where it became really problematic. Back in my neighborhood school, I was easily the best in everything, in mathematics, in reading, in writing, in everything, without much effort, which first left a lot of time to play and do other things. And secondly, kind of my position as the smartest kid in the class was easily secured. And this was my identity. I'm the smartest kid in the class. Suddenly, I find myself in a class with 30 other genius kids who also define themselves as being the smartest kid in the class. Now, you throw 30 10-year-old kids into a class like this, and you get a gladiatorial arena. Not with fists, but with words. We were merciless. It was like the cruelest place I've ever seen in my life was this class. Sometimes, you know, I read in history books about wars and terrible things that are happening, so it's worse. But like from personal experience, this was kind of the worst thing that I saw, was these 30 10-year-old kids tearing each other to pieces, trying to prove them I'm smarter than you. It was also hell for the teachers, because our kind of contest was who could find the mistakes the teachers make and humiliate the teachers. This was like, you're a king of the class for a day if you manage to humiliate and most of the time we just humiliated each other. Like, you know, the teacher asks something and somebody gives an answer and everybody jumps and says, this is not true. And so it went on for years. And the whole rationale of this class was to develop the intellect of these kids. So nobody invested anything in developing our social skills, in developing our emotional skills, or in developing our physical skills, our bodily skills. And it was a very, I now can joke about it, but it was a very painful experience. You know, after being for 10 years in this environment, as teenager, we came out with quite developed intellects, but with horrible social skills, which made, I know some of the people who were in that class, and they still carry deep scars, injuries from that time. And this taught me in the most kind of personal and visceral way that you cannot define a person or build a person based only on intellectual skills. There are much more important things, that ultimately humanity is about feelings and not about thoughts. Maybe if I have more time, I'll say something also about, I said something personal, now let's kind of open it to the grand vision of human evolution. You know, originally, we humans, our ancestors at least, were worms crawling on the ground or in the mud. A very simple life form. It's just a tube with two openings, a mouth to take in food, and another opening to expel all the waste from the body. There was no brain. There were already nerve cells, neurons, but there was no brain. The center of command of this ancient worm was in the stomach, where the food went. Now, over millions of years, in order to get food and also warn about danger, so more nerve cells developed around the mouth in order to taste the food and smell the food and see the food and hear the food. And this became the brain. And this is still our basic structure today. We are basically a worm. It's just, you know, look at yourself. It's just this long twisting tube with a few things attached to it. But it's a worm, and the brain is still near the mouth. But the big question is, maybe the center of control is still where it always was, in the stomach, not in the brain. And it's a big question in brain science, because maybe not the stomach, but the spinal cord is an integral part of the brain. And there are good reasons to think that, yes, you have all these neurons here that get all the attention, but ultimately the real center of command of the human being is still here.
Well, actually, I know exactly what you're talking about, but Professor Harari, as one of the smartest guys around the world saying that intelligence is not that important. It's really interesting. Okay, go on, Professor.
Yeah,
Chen.
actually, always there's kind of show off to say that I'm very smart, but it's not so important. But actually, I know that the students here on set of this hall, the Peking University students who have passed a very selective examination to go to this campus, and actually you during date back to your childhood, you are the smartest students in your class. But once you step into this campus, even though you are just somehow around average, and this is a very, this is very tough process of mind change, especially in the first year, first semester. You must accept that I'm just around average, and most of your teacher think that you just so you are not so smart. And all the way you adopted to demonstrate that you're smart is totally nonsense. So this is largely the things that lead us to a very important point to say that the things that make us human is about our deficiency. Or the things that is not so concerned with intelligence. Because the things is just, for me, it's just like this. When we say that we are trying to controlling certain things that has intelligence that supports us, we still has a very important reasoning mode that comes from instrumental reasoning. We try to regard this as a tool, but not as a subjector. And if you regard this as a tool, then actually you will get into the trap of modernity. The trap of modernity is a continuous pursuit of efficiency. You do things quicker, and you face up to different kinds of competitions. And you have competitions with human beings, other companies, other countries, other nations, all those things. It's about competition. And now we have a new competition. With what? With AI. With new and species that is totally has intelligence that supports us. This is the real things that stir and get all us into a panic. And this kind of worry actually lead to a historical reflections. Because what? The anxiety that long for thousands of years always come from the same things. The uncertainty of future, and how we can take action responsible to respond the change that's happening. So to speak, for me, that is, the things is not just about technology. The things is about the deep understanding of a deficiency of human beings, and we should, with full recognition of our limitation, then to take cautious steps towards the future. And to say, just as the motive of today's discussion, understanding is an antidote. You must firstly to do certain in-depth reflection before you take any action. But now we are too rush in action, and we too rush into a new form of competition. And this is largely what I called consequence of modernity. So we actually not face up to the so-called competition with AI, but we actually run into a competition with ourselves.
But I'm not sure I would put all the blame just on modernity, because we see things like that also in ancient times. I know very little about Taoism, so I would be happy to hear from you about it. But at least in the West, you can trace these things back thousands of years. Especially you talked about the fear that humans have of losing control, of not knowing. And this fear often propels people to look for something infallible. Like the fantasy of super intelligence is didn't begin today or a few decades ago. The fantasy of superintelligence, at least in the West, goes back thousands of years when humans yearned to find some superintelligent savior, Messiah, God, that knows everything, that never makes mistake, and that we can rely on him because we can't rely on ourselves. And this fantasy, the first artifact that it produced, and which is still one of the most important artifacts in the world, is the Holy Book. Again, I don't know what is the status of Taoist texts that you're studying. I'll be very happy to hear in a moment from you. But in religions like Judaism and Christianity, ultimate authority is invested not in any human being, like a priest or a rabbi or something. Ultimate authority is invested in an artifact, a text, which is supposed to be super intelligent, never makes a mistake. Now, of course, until today, there was always one very big problem with texts like the Bible. They can't talk. They can't answer questions. So here I am, believing that this text is perfect intelligence, never makes any mistake, but I have trouble understanding the words. It's not written very well. There are too many meanings to the same sentence. I'm not sure which meaning is the correct one. Or maybe this text was written 3,000 years ago when people were farmers. Now I have like a modern business. I'm not sure how to apply the lessons of this text to the new reality. So what do? I ask the text, it doesn't answer. So I need a human to interpret the text for me. And then a class of humans emerge which are experts in interpreting the text, and they become the real authority in society. These are the rabbis and the priests. Now, something extremely interesting is happening right now in the world, at least of these religions, that suddenly the text can talk. Because you can give an AI to read the Bible and all the other religious texts. I mean, over thousands of years, if I take the case of Judaism, rabbis didn't just read the Bible. They wrote thousands and thousands of commentaries on the Bible and commentaries on the commentaries and commentaries on the commentaries on the commentaries, which all became sacred. And your position as a rabbi, you're a big rabbi if you know more texts, and you're a little rabbi if you know only a few. No rabbi was able to read and remember all the texts. Impossible for a human. But AI can. For the first time in the history of Judaism, there is something on earth that can read all the texts of Judaism, everything written by every rabbi in Poland or Yemen like 800 years ago. It read everything. It remembers every single word. It can find connections and patterns in the holy texts that no rabbi can. Will it become the new authority in Judaism? Now, if you have a question and the AI says, oh, this is the answer, it can give you like pages and pages of proof from holy books. Now, if a human rabbi says, don't listen to this AI, it's a soulless machine, the problem, at least in Judaism, is that the authority is invested in the text, not in the human. So if an AI finds arguments in the text, the rabbis cannot just dismiss because it's the argument, because the text has authority. Now the word speaks. AI has mastered language. So it's interesting. This is kind of my perspective as a historian on all this. It's not just modernity. It's the whole of human history which is feeding into this AI revolution with very unexpected consequences, maybe. The same thing is happening in the legal system, which also a very authoritative text that until today we needed lawyers to interpret the text. Now the text can speak for itself. It's the same thing in the financial system. Until today, we needed bankers and financiers to interpret the money, the financial texts. Now they can interpret themselves. So maybe AIs take over the financial systems and the religions and the legal system. So this is just kind of a thought to share. And I would be very happy to hear how it is in Taoism and whether you think that you will have an AI Taoist master anytime soon.
No, actually, the case was totally different in Taoism. Because, I'm just not trying to blame everything to the modernity. But the thing is just like this, modernity comes from the Western tradition. Exactly, the modernity is the offspring of the whole tradition. But in China, it's totally different. Because Taoism is a too complex systematic sort. So let me just start with a very simple sentence, the very opening sentence of the Tao Te Ching, 道可道非常道, which means the things that you spoke out is not the constant things. Which means, for me, there is a very interesting definition of authority. You just mentioned of authority, which is always character. And for us Chinese people, along with the Taoist intellectual tradition, we actually have the two pre-assumptions. The first thing is, as common human beings, we have very clear limitation of our rationality. We just cannot say we can control or grasp the ultimate truth of the cosmos, of the whole thing. And this is because what? Because we are human beings. And then, is there any authority that we can rely on that seems always correct? Yeah, we have certain kinds of a memory of those things. Sagehood. There is golden age, governed by the sages, and the sages know the exact internal mechanism of the so-called cosmos. But the thing is just like this. Things change for Taoists. Everything changes, everything floating. And you just cannot say there is one set regulations and rules who can run all the way of the history of human beings. So the thing is that you must depend on the original text, but you just cannot just rely on it. You read into it and you get something back, and then you have a try of what you learned from it. And this does not mean you have the always correct regulations and rules that behind you. So to speak, the most important thing is that for Chinese people, especially for Taoists, we must keep open-minded towards the change, towards the ultimate rules of the cosmos, which we could say this: the cosmos is an eternal Sphinx riddle for Chinese people, especially for Taoists. So in this way, can we say that modernity as a product of Western tradition actually have a shortage to say that there is absolute rules, absolute regulations, and absolute or universal mechanism that can dominate everything that in our eyesight. But for Chinese or traditional Chinese thought, there is no such things. The universal correctness, the ultimate truth, there's nothing of it. Because you just look at the cosmos, everything changes. There is a totality of the cosmos, but there is no so-called ultimate and universal things that you can grasp and you can get. And this is why I just mentioned why Chinese people always keep humble to the change. And we always try to do things in a detour of learning and practicing. We learning something and we put it in practice, and we got reflections, and we back to the text again, and then we take action according to my learning or learning from the text. So this is largely very Chinese style. And this is why I called Chinese style actually very different from the Western counterpart. And this is why we could find certain therapy of the problem of modernity that we can draw from the Oriental sources, Oriental thought. So this is largely why we should do certain expansion of our intellectual views through mutual learning and mutual understanding, I think.
And similarly, in Buddhism, there is also a lot of similar arguments to what you just mentioned from Taoism, that we need to acknowledge the limitations of humanity. There are no absolute truths that you can hold on to. Everything is empty. And you need to rely on practice and not just on some text that says something. And then they memorize these texts again and again and again. And you go to monasteries and you see even monks that their main practice is memorizing texts. And the authority in the religion becomes the authority of the experts on the texts. And the texts say, don't rely on texts. And this is what the experts on texts will say to you. And, you know, there is a very famous Buddhist story about a monk who meditated in a forest, and there was a parrot living near where the monk was meditating. And the monk wanted to protect the parrot from danger. So the monk told the parrot, be careful. In this part of the woods, there is a hunter that comes every now and then. The hunter will spread grains on the ground. You'll see the grains, you'll get attracted to the grains. When you go for the grains, he hid a net, and the net he'll spring the net, he will capture you. So parrot, be careful, a hunter will come. And the parrot, the monk kept repeating this warning, parrot, be careful, a hunter will come. And the parrot, as a parrot, learned this warning. And the parrot would sit there on the tree and just repeat all day, parrot, be careful, a hunter will come. Parrot, be careful, a hunter will come. And one day, a hunter came. And the hunter spread the grains. And the parrot got attracted to the grains and went to eat the grains. And the hunter sprang the trap, and the parrot was captured. And all through that process, and even when the hunter was holding the parrot in the hand, going to kill him, the parrot kept saying, parrot, be careful, a hunter will come.
You mentioned a very interesting things is about what? For me, the things is just like this. I think the fundamental part of just you mentioned, the gap between theory and practice, is about what? It's about our basic need as human beings. I think that our fundamental need is the need for order. The order, the understanding of the outside world. And this kind of understanding actually lead us to set up our intellectual man side somehow. But, you know, when you run into a real life, you must somehow compromise with your immediate demand. And this compromise actually be part of your daily life. And you just cannot say, because there is a gap between theory and practice, to say that there is no use for theoretical understanding of the whole things. But what I try to say is that the foundation of order is we are longing for meaning. We must know what we are doing. You know, you just say that we do some things. We must have our intention, and where come from this? Where come this so-called intention? I say we have a systematic understanding of what is meaning, and this meaning actually on the basis of order, the acknowledgement of the order, and this order actually lead to so-called knowledge. This this logic lineage actually lead to my very simple conclusion to say this battle of the gap between the theory and the so-called practice. We should still respect the capacity of reflection and the theoretical construction. Because what? Because there is a balance between these two. And you must go back to theoretical reflections to keep you somehow distance from the wrong, misleading actions. So people is, human beings so complex. We just cannot say we have one extreme. Though just as I mentioned, for Chinese philosophers, the most important thing is what? Is balance between extremes. But not to say, okay, there is a gap, so we must have a certain kind of solution for it.
But what do we do in the present moment in history when, for thousands of years, philosophers could have debates like this? And it was important to some extent, but it was not all that important because the world went on. Humans created various orders, and the orders collapsed, and they created a new order, and the new order was maintained for some time, and it collapsed. And this is how it went for thousands of years. And at least my fear is that we have reached the end of the road, and that whatever wisdom we have accumulated from thousands of years of philosophy and from thousands of years of history, it needs to manifest now, or it's too late. That like all the big questions of philosophy are now practical questions. We have, I don't know how many years. Some say 5 years, some say 10 years, some say 15 years before what the experts called AGI, artificial general intelligence. Not this little AI that you have on your smartphones, the DeepSeek or the ChatGPT, but the artificial general intelligence, which will be more intelligent than humans, not in a specific field, but in all fields. And once this happens, the ball is out of our hands. It's like we are having this discussion, and astronomers tell us that they spotted a fleet of spaceships coming from some other solar system. According to the calculations of the astronomers, these aliens will land on the planet in between 5 and 15 years. We don't know much about them. Maybe they're nice. Who knows? Maybe they'll help us solve cancer and overcome climate change, and maybe not. But we have 5 to 15 years to think what we are doing. And this is the time that I think all the wisdom traditions of humanity, again, developed over thousands of years, what do they tell us? What do they tell us about this specific moment in history, which is, I think, different from previous moments, because the process of change, of course, things will continue to change, but maybe not for humanity. Maybe this is kind of the last station for humanity.
Actually, just one word. You can close the whole discussion. Actually, I think that for me, I'm more optimistic than you. For me, that advantage of humanity is just because of its deficiency. Just because we are not perfect. And you can imagine certain perfect things, but I do not think that we could just be replaced with the civilization of human beings will be replaced by certain super intelligence. Because what? Because we have emotions. But I just cannot imagine how silicon-based life have imagined, have desire, have intention to just to remove us, to set up a kind of governance on human beings. Because what? Because we have desires, because we are somehow has a very strong sense of shortage, strong sense of deficiency. So this is largely the only things that in my mind that might be more optimistic than you.
I'm not sure how much time we have, but I don't know whether AIs or AGIs will ever have consciousness, will ever have feelings. I think this is the biggest question of all, but I don't think that you need feelings in order to have goals and to act in the world as an independent agent. AIs, you give them a goal or they develop a goal, then they do things to reach the goal without any emotions or desires. If you have a self-driving vehicle, you can give the vehicle the goal, get me as fast as possible to the train station, and the self-driving vehicle on the way would run over people. Because I gave it the goal, get there as fast as possible, and forgot to tell it, but don't kill anybody on the way. So, and similar, we have so many examples. That the most famous example is what happened on social media. That social media companies gave the AIs, the very primitive AIs that run social media, the goal of increasing user engagement, make people spend more time on the platform, and the algorithms began to spread hate and fear online and to destabilize societies all over the world because they discovered that the easiest way to increase engagement is with fear and hatred and greed. So they don't have any desires, they don't have any emotions, but they can have a goal, and then they can do a lot of things on the way to that goal. And that, I think, is the danger for us. And the fact that we have emotions and feelings means that we can suffer a lot. I mean, I think that ultimately the definition of consciousness is the capacity to suffer and to be liberated from suffering. But this is no protection. Cows can suffer, and we didn't treat them very well. Other animals can suffer, and it's not necessarily even that we are evil. A lot of animals we have destroyed without even thinking about it. So the cows, we exploit them for meat and milk and so forth. But so many species have gone extinct in just the last few years by humans destroying their habitats, like they live in some forest, and the humans come and cut the forest and build something. And the humans are not even aware that they are doing something bad to these. There is no evil intention. It's just you don't see them. So some super intelligence may have whatever goal it could be, and it's not evil, it doesn't even have any emotions, it's just on the way to the goal, it runs over us.
Great. I think we are about to run out of time, but I'm sure that Professor Cheng likes to share some comments on. You're fine? Okay. So before we end, let's invite Professor Harari to give a close remark.
For me, it was an honor and a pleasure to be here with you today. And this has been one of the most inspiring discussions I've had recently. So thank you for that. The reason I do these talks and that I wrote the book is because I really think that humanity is about to make maybe the most important decisions in our history. And at present, there are very few people in very few countries that understand what is happening and that take part in the conversation. Lots of people now have heard about AI, but most people don't have a deep enough understanding of the AI revolution to know what is at stake and to feel competent to take part in the discussion. So I can't tell people what would be the solutions or what policies to adopt. My understanding is also very limited. My goal is to give many more people in many more countries a basic understanding of what is the AI revolution, what is at stake, so that millions of people in numerous countries will feel motivated and competent to join the conversation so that we can hear more opinions, more interests, more worldviews, and thereby hopefully reach a better decision. At present, the people who really understand and take the decisions, they are not even elected representatives of anybody. They are mostly these leaders of the big AI companies. And this is dangerous for humanity So that's my motivation, and I hope that you will feel motivated and competent to take part in the conversation, because it's the conversation about your future also, about everybody's future. My other remark is that I noticed that there are several people here that read my books, that maybe are my fans, and I know from previous, I have historical knowledge, so I know what happens at the end of the event, that lots of people come and they want to sign books and take selfies and so forth, and unfortunately I don't have the time to do it because I have to rush to another event. So I would leave you with something better than my signature and better than my picture, which is really part of me, it's my atoms. Just as a final thought for reflection and about the interconnectedness of everything, we have sat here together in this beautiful hall for an hour and a half, breathing all the time, and the air mixes our breath together. So a lot of the atoms that were inside my body an hour and a half ago are now in your body. And a lot of the atoms that an hour and a half ago were in your body are now in my body. So in this way, we have shared something even more important than a signature or a picture. Thank you.
Thank you very much.